Inside today's episode, I do recognize that not all of you know what happy baby is, and not many of you know what breathing positions to get into and what moves are really going to help my pelvic floor the most. And while that question is a loaded one because it's individual for all of us, there are a big group of exercises, especially around the breathing, that I think everybody should be doing just to maintain general mobility and release tension and keep our core control and coordination good, to keep our mental health and stress in check. And so this episode is really to dive into some of my favorite yoga poses. Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Desiree Cassell. I'm an orthopedic and pelvic floor physical therapist specializing in women's health, aka pelvic floor. I'm a wife, mom of 3, foodie, lover of all things movement and nature, and I'm super passionate about educating, empowering, and supporting other women like you to find and maintain balance throughout all aspects of their lives, without pain, pressure, or peeing their pants. And this is the Balanced Momtality Podcast, where we will talk about all things pelvic floor, your core, and optimizing your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum recovery, providing you with the knowledge and tools so that you can feel like the strong, playful, and happy mom that you and your family deserve. Now let's get you out of those pads and back to loving movement. Fill up your water, pop in those AirPods, roll out your mat, and let's connect. Before we start today's episode, just a quick disclaimer that anything mentioned in this podcast is not meant to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have any questions or concerns about your healthcare needs, please seek the care of your medical provider. This is also a safe space where we will be talking about very sensitive but important topics, such as issues with peeing and pooping, relationships, and even sex. So if you have littles around, probably a good idea to pop those AirPods in. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hey girl, I just can't even believe. I feel like I'm always saying this though. It's summer. Like what? It's already summer? I mean, by the time this comes out, it might actually be summer, but we're just a week or two away. And I think that it's so nuts. I feel like this year flew by, especially May. I think we can all agree. May just always becomes like a cluster and life gets so crazy. But one of the things I'm trying to keep in mind as summer is rearing its head is, obviously that's the chaos of kids being home, routines get out of whack, things just don't get done like they used to. That's just the reality, as much as we really want them to. And I do think it's really helpful to still try to create some structure and routine, but we have to accept that some of that chaos just doesn't happen. And so in those moments, that's where we have to just take advantage of the few little things that we can get in for ourselves, because at this point it is unacceptable to put yourself on the back burner. So while summer might come and it might be full of fun, it might be full of trips, it might be full of chaos, maybe you hate having all the kids home, I'm not sure. Either way, we need to still prioritize ourselves and our time. And even if that means when you get in bed at the end of the day, you're pulling up your legs, getting into happy baby, and you're doing some deep breath work, that's great. So inside today's episode, I do recognize that not all of you know what happy baby is, and not many of you know what breathing positions to get into and what moves are really going to help my pelvic floor the most. And while that question is a loaded one because it's individual for all of us, there are a big group of exercises, especially around the breathing, that I think everybody should be doing just to maintain general mobility and release tension and keep our core control and coordination good, to keep our mental health and stress in check. And so this episode is really to dive into some of my favorite yoga poses. So yoga, I think, is such a fabulous type of exercise, and there are so many different types of yoga as well. So this isn't just to, say one type of yoga is better than the other. Do not get me wrong. I am not a yoga instructor. I'm not a yogi. Maybe at some point I'll have my friend who's a yoga instructor on the show so she can help guide us a little bit more. But today I really just wanted, this is for the beginners. Maybe you're even used to yoga or you've never done it, or maybe you've done it and you hurt yourself, so you stopped doing it. The idea behind this type of yoga, it's really the breath work, but the poses that I pick many times are a traditional yoga pose to do the breath work in. And so I did just want to touch on the benefits of that and some of my favorite yoga poses for the breath work and for the pelvic floor and the back and the hips. It really just attacks a lot of things, which is again why I think it's so great and so valuable. I also just love how yoga is all about breathing. It brings so much awareness to the breath, but many times it's just not bringing that awareness deep enough. They're having you bring attention to your breathing. They're having you breathe deep into your belly, but maybe they're not really guiding you on breathing deep into the pelvic bowl and getting that space to expand and the back to expand. And so there is some changes and nuances that I have my patients do when they're going through these yoga poses. But, aside from that, it really just gets you in your body, really feeling your body and what do you feel in your body, whether it's with the breath, with the movement, how are you positioned, how are you aligned. This is meditation and it's an active form of meditation. So I think that it's great, especially for people that feel like they can't just sit still and quote unquote clear their mind so that they are meditating. That does not have to be meditation. Meditation is just being present in your body. And I find the breath work is the best way to do that because it is giving your brain an active thing to think on, but it's in the moment. That one thing, that's what you're thinking on. So it can be so helpful for stress, anxiety, depression, all of these other mental health aspects. But obviously it's a physical movement, and so it's great for our body. So many different types of yoga. Some hold the poses forever and ever and ever. That is not my favorite kind of yoga. I hate that kind of yoga. I'm sure it has its many benefits as well, but I'm way more about just flowing through the movement. So while some of these positions I might hold for even up to 1 to 5 minutes, other moves, I just flow through them and I breathe 3 to 5 times in that position and then I move on. So it does not have to be this idea of just holding a pose for a long extended period of time. We are also not doing super intense strengthening or toning type of yoga with this. This is just for relaxation and body mobility and core control, stabilizing muscles, so many good things that this type of movement can bring into our body. And a lot of these positions are easy to get into, even again, like at the end of the day when you're in bed. Maybe you forgot to get on the mat on the floor and go through this routine. And so all you do is you pick 1 or 2 of these poses and you do them in bed at the end of the day, or you squat down and do it while your family is watching TV at the end of the day. We don't necessarily have to carve out time to do this breath work and to do these yoga moves. And these yoga moves, especially if you bring the breath work awareness to them, is just such a powerhouse. Because again, obviously these yoga positions have many benefits. Like if we think about one of my favorites, cat-cow, if you're familiar with that one, many people are usually familiar with that one. You're on your hands and knees and you're alternating between arching your back up towards the ceiling and then dropping the spine in your belly towards the floor. So arching it up is cat and dropping it towards the floor is cow. And this is getting spinal mobility. It's really loosening up the back, the muscles in the back. It's working on pelvic mobility in the hips. So there's lots of physical things that are really going on here. But if we bring our attention to the breath and where we feel tension, it can just really give us the bigger bang for our buck. So for example, with that same movement, cat-cow, instead of just arching up and arching down, we can tend to find that the most mobile or flexible parts of our spine is what's doing the moving. And so it's more beneficial to really move through this segmentally, really thinking about moving one vertebrae at a time so that you can feel the spaces that move super easy, or especially the spaces that feel really stiff and tight that don't like to move, because that's the feedback we need to tell our body, or for our body really to tell our brains what we need to focus on, because that's telling you where there's tension in the system and also where you want to get that breath. We want to breathe into that tension. And on that note, as you're breathing through this movement, you're also observing, where is the breath going in this position? Where is it not going in this position? Do I feel the breath in my back? Do I feel it in my pelvic floor? Do I feel it in my sides? Is it getting into my belly? Is it getting into my rib cage? Remember, these are all the pieces of that balloon canister that need to be expanding on our breath. And if it's not, then these positions are really helpful, because we want to play around with all these different moves I'm going to list today, because then you can take mental note for you where you feel it and where you don't. And I'm just going to say, most people are pretty tight and not feeling the breath in their pelvic floor and in their back. And the third leading space is the sides. So belly and chest tend to be where the breath wants to go. And if you're getting it into your belly, that's good, but we do want to get that whole rest of the balloon to expand. So again, where are you not feeling it? And then we're going to go through these movements and see, do I all of a sudden feel it in my pelvic floor? Do I actually feel it in my back here? Cool. Because then when you're short on time, or you just forgot by the end of the day, you can get into those one or two positions and go through that movement and breathe a little bit and know that you are getting such a great benefit in relaxing the tension in your body and coordinating that system again. So again, cat-cow, such a great posture, a great yoga pose. As you're moving through it though, really think segmentally. Wind up by first tucking that tailbone and arching through the low back, especially for females, especially pregnancy. We get such a big curve in our low back. That anterior tilt, that lordotic curve just gets pretty intense during pregnancy. So going into something like cat, where we're asking it to now round and open, can be pretty tight, and really for good reason, right? Belly's pulling us forward, the muscles get tight there, so then the joints get tight there. But that's why this is a position and a posture we really want to work through and not let it get so tight. So especially if you feel like you have a big anterior tilt or curve like me, when you go through cat, make most of that cat movement happen at your low back. Really try and feel the arching and opening in that low back. Most of us feel, and especially if you have kind of like that slouched curve in your upper spine, that space likes to do cat. It already is doing it. So when you go into cat, it's like, oh, yep, I can arch a little bit more. I've got all this range. This is easy. And so I don't even necessarily like to bring cat all the way up into my spine. I like to keep my cat movement more at my lumbar spine and low back into my pelvis. Whereas vice versa, when I drop into cow, that's the posture my low back really likes. It goes into that posture really easily. So I'm actually going to hold my lower back and pelvis in more of a neutral or tabletop position. And I'm going to try and drop my chest to the floor, because remember, that's where we are a little more curved and arched. So it's going to be stiffer. It's going to have a harder time extending and dropping towards the floor. So that's usually where I bring my cow, is from my chest, really dropping the chest bone to the floor while trying to keep the lower back actually kind of flat. Now, if you're unsure about any of these positions, I'm not going to necessarily go through the specifics of every single one. So go look them up, because there are a million different videos on how to do these movements just to get a general idea. But the goal of this episode is to get you thinking a little deeper than just the movement themselves. Really thinking, how is my body feeling here? What feels tight? What moves easily? How is my breath moving through my body in this position? Where is it not going? These are the things you need to be thinking about as you're going through these moves. So cat-cow is one of my favorites, especially if you have back pain. But then from there, especially if we arch up into cat, sit back onto your heels, drop that butt all the way down to the heels, and just let your chest fall onto your thighs. This is child's pose. Many people do child's pose with their knees wide, and this is many pictures you'll find. And this is great, especially if you have, if you're pregnant or you just don't feel like you have any room with your belly to compress onto your thighs and you need to open your legs to create space. That's totally fine. However, I actually really like to do it with the knees together and those thighs together, especially if you're not pregnant. Obviously, we don't want to put too much pressure on baby, but this really helps it so that compression is actually blocking the belly. So that belly space that wants to expand now is resisted. So it forces that breath to go into the tighter spaces. So for many people, child's pose is one of the few positions they actually feel the back expand when they're doing this breath work. Now, I do love hand cues. I place my hand on my low back when I do this so I can visually and tactily have a space that my breath is trying to go to and expand. So placing that hand on the low back and just taking that nice, deep, slow breath, trying to really breathe into the pelvic bowl and the back, getting that space to open up. Child's pose can feel so good, especially if we add a side reach. So reach to that left side, feel that right side open up, breathe into that right side wherever you feel tension. Take 3 to 4 breaths here. Reach over to the right side, feel that left side open up, breathe into the left side wherever you feel tension. Take 3 or 4 breaths here. So child's pose is one of my favorites. Again, especially if you have back pain, that one can feel really good. The goal of all of these is that they should feel comfortable. So if something feels achy or pinchy and your joints just don't want to go into a certain position, definitely modify it. We can modify it by adding pillows, by not going as deep into it. And so just really feel it out. Make sure you can rest comfortably, because if you feel your body like tensing and holding and you can't wait to get out of that posture, then it's not the right position for you, or you need to modify it a little bit, because the whole goal with this is that you can just rest and relax and feel that tension in that breath. So child's pose is another really big favorite of mine. Another one that I really like is happy baby that I mentioned. And that's one where it's called happy baby because it looks like a happy baby on the floor. You're on your back and you're bringing those hips up towards your chest, those knees towards your chest. And the baby, that true happy baby, they're holding on to their feet, right? Their hands are on their feet and they're just kind of there rocking side to side. They're a happy baby. And so we can do this just by bringing those legs up. And if this hurts your knees or your hips, they don't have to come up that high. Just bringing them up and holding and supporting the legs so they don't have to hold themselves, and doing some deep breath here. I would bring the knees wider than your body. So if we can bring the knees wider than our body, we'll feel a little bit of opening in that pelvic outlet. But play around with this, because that hip position does affect the tension in the pelvic floor. So if we bring those knees wide, we're going to get a different piece of the pelvic floor versus if we bring those knees together and let the feet come out wide. So play around with both of those positions, knees out, feet in, and then knees in, feet out, and see what you feel. Does one space feel tighter? Does one position feel easier? Just start exploring these movement patterns and taking those nice, deep, slow breaths. One of my other favorite positions, and this one isn't for everybody, again, it requires a lot of joint range of motion, but a deep squat. Getting in that deep squat, feet are flat, you're just sinking your butt back and letting it drop. You should be able to just sit here comfortably. If not, again, you can always add a yoga block or a little stool. I have patients sit on their steps at home. The idea is that we do want the pelvis lower than the knees. So we need those knees up, and that gives a good stretch on the hips, but play around with the depth of that. You can do it supported. So don't feel like you have to kind of hover, especially if your feet aren't hitting the ground and you're kind of hovering there. That just means there's tension in the system. So we need to be able to have those feet flat, fully relax onto the ground, and just open up the pelvic bowl. So whether you need a step, a stool, yoga block, whatever that is, try the deep squat, because it is one of the few positions that people are finally like, oh, I feel it in my pelvic floor now. That's what it should feel like. Even better, put a hand there. Put a hand on the glutes. Put a hand on the vulva. Feel that pressure change. Give yourself that feedback. And just observe in your body, how does this feel? Is it getting into where I have pain right now? Is my system calming down? Just move through each of these positions, anywhere from 3 breaths to 10 breaths. This is all for your comfort, but that way you can start getting some mobility in, play around with those moves. If you have time to do them all at once, great. If not, take mental note of which ones did finally get it into your painful, tight spaces, so that during the summer, when we are just in chaos mode, we can at least collapse on the bed and know, oh, if I just roll over into child's pose right now and take some deep breaths, that's a win. And this is also just a great time to do that in the evening to really calm the system down and get the mind and body ready for sleep. So I hope this inspired you to go play around with some other yoga poses if you're not already doing these, and also just inspired you to take these thoughts into every exercise you're doing. Really, we want to feel where our breath is going, how it feels. How does our body feel in that posture? Where is our breath going? Where is it not? And just feel this out. Be really present in your body. And if you feel your brain wander, that's fine. You're just going to bring it back and focus on the breath. But if you have any other questions, or you're curious how to modify, or you want other options, go over to the Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support and let me know. But otherwise, I will see you guys next time on the Balanced Momtality Podcast. Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you've got so many other important things going on, but I hope it was helpful and you leave here with some tools to help you in your healing journey. And I just want to ask you, if you have found this helpful, to please leave a review on iTunes. Scroll down to the bottom of my podcast page and leave that 5-star review so it can help other women see this information. And also, if you want to be a part of my community of amazing women trying to balance all the things, great tips and insight, and sharing stories and just motivating each other along the way, feel free to join my Facebook group, The Balanced Momtality Wellness and Support. I hope to see you here next time on the Balanced Momtality Podcast.